So you've made a decision to sell your collection or to sell books from your collection, and in this video I'm going to offer up some tips and pointers that I think might be helpful. Stay tuned. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to take some time to talk about how to go about selling your collection or books from your collection now that you've made a decision to do so. And in this video, I want to offer up some practical tips and pointers, but I'm also going to offer a couple of cautionary notes at the end of the video, so make sure you stay tuned until the end. The very first thing that you have to do is you have to figure out what is the collection, or what are the items that you are actually going to sell. And what I mean by that is that you may want to take some time to consider if you're going to sell everything or whether you're going to sell selective books within the collection. You may want to set the things that you want to keep to the side so that you don't mix them into the overall mix as things move forward. But you also have to consider what it is that you are going to be selling. Are you selling floppies or omnibuses or trade paperbacks? Are you selling magazines? Are you selling just comics? Are they raw? Are they graded? Are you selling trading cards or action figures? Or is it just comics? You want to take some time to think through what it is that you are actually going to sell versus what you are going to keep. What is the collection? The second thing that you need to think about is how much time are you going to dedicate to this activity? And this is an important question, I think, because I don't know that people fully appreciate that you can spend a tremendous amount of time selling a collection, or you can take no time at all. It really is up to you. If your goal is to get every single dollar that you can get for your books or for your collection, that means that you're going to have to dedicate some time to that activity. And we're going to talk about some of those activities in this video. But if your goal is to get the books out of the house, to just move on, to just make some cash really quickly, there are methods to do that as well. But you have to ask yourself, am I going to dedicate a lot of time, energy, and effort to this activity or not? The third thing that you want to do is to take an inventory. You want to know exactly what is in your collection, because if you go to sell a collection or even a handful of books, one of the first questions that people will ask is, well, what's in the collection, or what are the books, and how much do you want for them? And so if you're not able to answer those two questions, you're going to have a tough time actually framing up what it is that you're offering to these people. So you want to take some time to do an inventory. And as you would imagine, there are a range of things that can be done here. Some folks will simply write out a list of the title and the issue. Others will pull out an Excel spreadsheet and will basically create a spreadsheet of the collection in which they identify the title, the issue number, the publication date, whether the book is raw or graded, what the grade happens to be for that book, as well as whether there is something significant that happens in that comic or not. They will take some time to do a thorough inventory of that collection. By doing this on either end of the spectrum, it allows you to understand what is in the collection, which leads us to the next point of determining the value for the collection. Before I go on, I will tell you that if you don't want to dedicate a ton of time to this, you can actually drop your collection off at a local comic shop. There are comic shops out there potentially in your local area that will essentially do an inventory for you and will come back to you and say, based upon what we see, this is what we will offer. The challenge is that if you haven't done your own inventory, you won't really know whether that is a fair offer or not. But again, it goes back to how much time you want to dedicate to this activity. So as I mentioned briefly, the next step is to determine the value of the collectibles that you are trying to sell. You already have the inventory. What you need to do is to now start to figure out the value of those individual items. And this will potentially take some time. If you are selling graded books, it's relatively straightforward. If you've already identified the book and the grade, you can reference a pricing service out there to determine what is an actual fair price for that comic. And I would encourage you not to just use something like eBay sold items. You want to use an actual pricing service because eBay is not one. If you have raw books in your collection, you're going to potentially need to grade those comics to come up with a rough guesstimation or dirty grade, as I call it, so that you can assign a value to that comic. Let's say that you don't have a lot of major keys in your collection. You may need to establish a threshold for what you grade versus not. If you have a lot of books in your collection that are modern books that may only be worth a couple of dollars, I don't know that you want to grade those versus if you have some keys that are worth, hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars, that might be where you want to take the time to do the actual grade. But that goes back to the inventory and how detailed you are there. At the end of the day, you need to arrive at a value for your collection. Once you know what's there, what is the value of that collection? Because that value will be critically important for you, especially if you are trying to sell your collection either in whole or in parts, right? So understanding the value is critical to that. The next thing that you need to think about is how. How are you going to sell this collection? Will you sell the collection in its entirety? Will you be selling individual books? And that's kind of sort of up to you. If you only have a handful of books to sell and they're really good books, it might be advantageous to sell them individually. Versus if you have a collection that might be comprised of a lot of modern books, you might want to just sell those in bulk. It really is going to come down to personal preference. What I will tell you is that you definitely want to take a step back. And you want to look at your collection. You want to look at the value of that collection so that you can make some informed decisions about the approach. And here's what I mean by that. If you have a collection that is valued at $100,000, it might be tough for you to sell that collection in its entirety. How many people out there have $100,000 to spend on comics? I don't know, versus those people that could spend $100 or $200 if you have individual books or if you have a collection that is not worth a whole lot of money. So you want to consider what it is that you have. You want to also think about the potential buyers that happen to be out there. Because the reality is that you could have a really awesome collection that could be worth a lot of money and you cannot sell it in its entirety because of the dollar amount associated with that collection. So you definitely want to give some thought to that. Maybe breaking the collection down into ages could be a good way to go. Like you sell your golden age books to someone, you sell your silver age books to someone, and maybe your moderns to someone else. A lot of it will have to be you making a decision based upon the landscape that you have in front of you. The next thing that you have to think about is where do you want to sell your comics? And as you would imagine, there are an infinite number of possibilities here, both online and offline. You could take your books to a local comic shop and sell them there. You could set up at a local con and sell your books directly to consumers. You could set up a profile on any number of apps that exist and sell your books that way. eBay is also a great way. You could hire a consignor to sell books on your behalf, and that could either be someone that is virtually online or it could actually be a local comic shop. If you have really cool books, there are comic shops that will put your books in their display cases and sell them to their customers in the local area for you. And of course, there is a fee for either one of those options, but you do have options. And a lot of it will come down to you. What books do you have? What is your collection? How much money do you want to make? How soon do you need to realize those funds? A lot of it is personal preference, and there really is no wrong way to do this thing. But hopefully, over the course of this video, I've offered up a couple of tips and pointers that will help you. Now, with that said, I want to get to a couple of bonus items that I think could be helpful to you as well. One thing that you might want to think about is not allowing people to cherry pick through your collection. If you decide that you are going to sell your books locally face to face and you invite people over to look at the collection, one thing that could happen is that people will want to go through that collection and they will want to pull out specific books, more than likely the keys that they want to purchase. This is not a bad way to go, but what could happen is that you are going to be left with a lot of books that are not going to be worth a lot of money, and you're going to have a really difficult time potentially selling those books because all of the keys have already been stripped out. So you want to think about cherry picking. Is that what you want to do? I don't know. If you are going to be selling your books online, you have to learn how to take good pictures of your comics. And I have videos here on the channel that offer up tips and pointers for how best to do that. But if you're going to sell a book, you need to make sure that you are taking good photos and that you are not applying filters to those photos to make them look better than maybe they actually do. Accurate descriptions is also another important thing, especially if you're going to be selling on eBay or something like that. Disclose all of the flaws. Make sure you take some time to look at the book. Make sure you outline the flaws so that people know exactly what you're getting. What you do not want to do is you do not want to sell a comic to someone, not disclose some things, they get it, and now they feel like they've been cheated, and now you have to go through the return process or them filing claims or any of that other kind of stuff. It is best to just disclose it and allow the book to speak for itself. As I mentioned, there are lots of ways to sell comics, and one way to sell a collection is to sell it to a dealer or to a local comic shop. One thing that you potentially want to keep in mind is that that dealer or that comic shop is going to need to make a profit on that collection. And so if you've done your inventory, you've done your valuation for the entire collection, they may see that number and try to get you to back off of that number to create margin for them to be able to make some money. And so depending upon the dealer or the comic shop, you could be looking at 20%, 30%. It just really depends upon where the market is, what your collection is, and who that dealer or local comic shop is. But by having a valuation for the collection, you have the ability to play with that number to figure out if it actually makes sense for you or not. With regard to consigners, I want to offer up a little bit of a cautionary note here. I've heard horror stories of people that have worked with consigners to sell some of their key comics, and they have been encouraged by those consigners to take less money for that book than maybe what they wanted in an attempt to sell the book, right? Because the consignor gets paid when the book actually gets sold. And sometimes they will encourage you to take a little bit less money or a lot less money in order to get the book to move so that they can make their profits. Now, I've seen and heard several times where someone has been pressured by a consignor to sell a comic, only to have that same comic appear on that consignor's website or profile a couple of weeks later at a much higher price point. Now, I don't know if there's anything nefarious that is happening there, but I will encourage you to consider who it is that you are doing business with. Consider who it is that you are entrusting to sell your comics, and just be smart about what you're doing. One of the last tips that I'll offer up is that you want to learn how to ship comics. If you are going to be selling comics online, you want to learn how to ship them. You want to make sure that you have all of the right materials on hand to ensure that that comic can go from your hands to the end buyer as safely as possible. And there are videos here on the channel that will help you to do just that. Generally speaking, if you search YouTube for Regie Collects plus a term, you will find a video or several. With that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch. I hope that this was helpful. I will also encourage you to check out the playlist for selling. There is a playlist that I've set up that actually has a bunch of other videos that I've done on this topic that may also prove helpful to you. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yeah. Should you practice art? Or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, you know? The one that's gonna be a master. The one that's more than a rapper. The one that's an educator. The one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts. He's got the mindset expansive. He understands that his time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan. Straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms of pure souls having them conversations. Synergy and combinations. You fly and we waiting. Indian style and the gold.